So for those who might not be familiar with Urban Science is a global consulting company specializing in automotive retail channel strategy and performance improvement using data analytics and scientific methods. We work with many OEMs and dealers all around the world in this regard. I'm the Regional Managing Director for Asia Pacific at Urban Science. And in APAC, we have offices in China, India, Japan, and Australia to serve our clients. Now, some of you might be wondering about my strange accent, so let me tell you I'm a British Australian, which means I can never lose the ashes. A key aspect of what our organization does is research how new disruptive forces could reshape automotive networks such as alternative retail formats, the impact of electric vehicles, ride-sharing, and other emerging trends. In this presentation, we'll be looking at trends and survey results from the United States, but I will leave it to you in the audience to determine how closely this may point the way for the industry in India. So first, I just want to look at some trends for the United States. We can see on this chart the growth from 1946 through to the year 2000. In 1946, there were 2 million units sold. By 2000, 17 million units. As you can see, there's been ups and downs through the business and economic cycles, but a broad trend of growth. More recently, what we see, comparing 2000 and 2018, is significant population growth in the United States. In fact, 18%, up to 329 million people in 2018, but broadly flat automotive sales between 2000 and 2018. And of course, if you look at the chart, you can see in 2009 there was a deep dive in volumes during what we call the global financial crisis, the GFC, which was actually an approximate 40% drop from peak to trough. So, but of course it recovered and it was back up to the current levels, 17 million. But a key question when we look at this is the consumption declining? The number of vehicles sold per person is declining in the United States. What does that mean for a retail strategy? So at Urban Science, we're interested in hearing what's going on in the industry. We want to keep a pulse on the changes in the marketplace and have a broader view. And in the United States, to this end, we commissioned 2 surveys in collaboration with a company called the Harris Poll to receive answers to questions regarding understanding buyer behavior and brand interaction preferences through the customer journey, and also looking at what dealers' tolerances are for evolving alternative retail network formats. So we went into this engagement wanting to better understand what dealers thought about the future and what they're preparing for from a time and a financial investment perspective. We also wanted to hear from consumers. What are they looking for and what is their perspective on the evolving industry and what has their experience been? For this survey, we had a good blend of dealers in terms of size and location, and over 200 dealers participated. In terms of the consumer survey, again, we had a good representation of geography, gender split, education, and other demographics, with over 2,000 consumers participating. So the key thing is there's a lot of noise in the industry now, but what do the consumers really think? We continuously hear that consumers want a convenient, fully online experience. But is that really true when purchasing a vehicle? Do consumers see the value of a dealership visit? And if so, what value does the dealer and staff bring to the consumer? Before we review these results in earnest, let's recap the customer journey taken when purchasing a vehicle today in the United States. Well, in reality, the consumer journey to purchase a vehicle in today's world can be summarized with the term Omni-Channel Retailing, a cross-content strategy designed to move the consumer between the digital and physical realms. OEMs and dealers want consumers to be able to easily move between all sources of information for their brand and to find what they need and nudge them to buy when appropriate. There are multiple physical opportunities to engage with the consumer, And while a journey can start with physical or digital, nearly all consumers will harness both to make a decision. The physical brand experience is key to purchase, but the digital experience drives the initial traffic. Both are vitally important. With this in mind, we wanted to know what consumers really think. What is their perspective on the overall dealership experience? How do they want to receive information, and how do they actually want to interact with the dealer and vehicles during the purchase process? So here's some key highlights. 81% of auto-buying consumers trust information they receive from an OEM dealership. And 85% of auto-buying consumers agree a vehicle is too big of an investment to risk not seeing it before you buy. Now think of that in the context of people saying that consumers only want an online experience with no interaction from a dealer. Auto-buying consumers do consider price first when choosing a dealership, and 84% of consumers responded that vehicle price was the most important factor. However, other factors which were vitally important included quality of the service team, a low-pressure sales approach, staff expertise, and consumers' past experience with the dealership. Auto-buying consumers are also visiting more dealerships than was previously thought. On average, consumers consider 2.6 dealerships, they visit 2.5 dealerships, and 68% visit more than one dealership. And in the United States, this contrasts with a widely quoted figure that a consumer visits about 1.2 dealerships because they've completely made up their mind in advance by online means. The Harris poll data also gives the opportunity to break the information down further by generation. And what we actually saw, which was very interesting, was that the younger generations are actually visiting the dealerships more than other generations, further reinforcing how key the brand experience is to consideration of that brand. So in fact, the average dealerships for Generation Z, young millennials, which are young adults, is 3.3, compared to what we call the baby boomers, who are people now in their late 60s, early 70s, of 1.9. So not only are younger generations visiting more dealerships, they are visiting all different brands. And we uncovered two very distinct lines of questioning that the generational breakdown shows a close correlation of how many dealerships were visited and how many brands were considered. Of course, one theory could be that our younger generation, Gen Z, in particular, are deliberating carefully around the most significant purchase in their life so far, their first new car. Another finding was that test drives are crucial to the car buying decision. So the poll really drove home the fact that consumers place a heavy value on test drives in the United States. 83% of customers would never buy a vehicle without test driving it first. 89% see test drives as a top influential resource in their car buying decision. And currently, the most common way to test drive a vehicle is to visit a dealership. So, some of the implications around this. Consumers harness information from online and offline resources in their decision-making process. However, they are clearly demonstrating a need to physically engage with the brand before the purchase and trust the dealer and OEM to expertly guide them. And this is all great information, of course, but it contradicts somewhat the notion that consumers are seeking a fully digital online buying experience. While the typical journey does start online, consumers need to physically engage with the brand before making a purchase, and they want the OEM and the dealer to guide them to the right vehicle. The transition from online to offline at the dealership and back online should be seamless. And this leads us on to the next topic, something heavily discussed globally, and I know discussed here in India from the conversations I've had thus far, and that is alternative retail formats. Now, the combination of the internet and mobile devices has improved the convenience and delivery of many services, so much that consumers now have different expectations of what convenience means to them. They're information-rich and armed with research, reviews, and opinions, all within a Google arm's reach. Their expectations have changed since the pre-digital era, especially when it comes to buying or servicing a vehicle. When it comes time to physically engage, we see this evolution propelled by two key drivers: consumer desire for a different engagement experience and OEM's desire for consumers to have a positive brand experience. And some OEMs see the answer as alternative retail formats. Now, an alternative retail format is a retail location designed to address consumer needs, create awareness, provide brand education and/or showcase brand experience in order to influence revenue growth and drive brand affinity. And of course, it may offer one or more specialized services based on local demand. Now, there's many types of formats that can suit different scenarios. And here are just a few examples with the pop-up, boutique lifestyle, and campus. And now, Urban Science, we've actually identified, I think, over 20 different kinds of retail formats across the world. And my own personal experience of working extensively in China has shown that many automotive manufacturers and indeed dealers are engaging in all kinds of different retail formats in order to get close to the consumers and make purchasing a vehicle more convenient for them. So to help understand the broader landscape, we wanted to understand the opinion and intent of dealers, their appetite to explore and implement alternative retail formats, and what kinds of formats they were considering. So here's some highlights. First, let's qualify one important point. Your network is your largest asset and should be leveraged to provide consumers what they need: trusted guidance in their vehicle purchase. Both you and your dealers are seen as essential partners in the eyes of the consumer. The polls showed that 75% of American consumers would not want to buy a vehicle without a dealership involved. And 72% agree that a salesperson's expertise is necessary to navigate the buying process, especially if you consider the amount of technology in today's vehicles, as well as the emergence of electric vehicles. So nearly all dealers polled agree they must find alternative ways to sell over and above perhaps the pure 4S dealership standard. So dealers are preparing for the future and can see the need for change. So 89% of dealers agree they must find alternative ways to sell, and 93% are considering some sort of alternative retail format. And the implications of all this, of course. OEMs should consider how alternative retail formats can enhance their dealer networks to meet the evolving definition of consumer convenience and help drive customers to their brand. There's an opportunity to harness and guide dealer enthusiasm through strategic plans and diligent monitoring to help them find the best locations and configuration to meet demand. Now, the study that we undertook was quite comprehensive in nature, and today I've just given a very small overview, given the time constraints. However, we have the full report, which also looks at many other areas, including things like subscription services, available at our booth there on the back. So with that, I'd like to thank the audience and offer the opportunity for any questions.
My question is, how will online marketplaces affect the channel?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. It also depends on the franchise laws within a particular country. Countries such as the United States, it's not actually possible to have a wholly online channel due to franchising laws. So vehicles do need to be sold through retailers, and they can't necessarily be sold by OEMs direct to consumers. But I think in terms of online channel, as I've mentioned during the presentation, customers' purchase journeys inevitably start online. So whether you're talking about going to the OEM website, a dealer website, a third-party website, those are all vitally important in forming the the purchase pathway for the consumer.
So, as a dealer, it was wonderful listening to you and the figures that you gave about 83% people actually visiting a dealership before they take a buying decision. Actually assures us that we are going to remain in business much longer than a lot of people thought we would. What I'm looking at is that these are your findings in the US and probably other countries. Are you planning to do a similar kind of a survey in India? And if so, when and how fast?
Yeah, so we did this survey earlier this year in the United States, and we are planning to run the same survey in China and India in the next several quarters, which will be interesting because, of course, we will be able to have the same kind of information as is available at the booth there, but with statistics from India and indeed China for those who are interested in looking what the Chinese are doing. But also what will be interesting is to do the comparison with the gap analysis between what the American consumer is doing and what the Indian consumer is doing now or what they might do in the future. But to build on your point, I think it was a little bit surprising how much in some quarters how much emphasis American consumers, who we think in some ways are somehow the most advanced consumers in the world, they are very much relying upon the dealer networks, and it's vitally important. So even if they could buy a car completely online, they don't necessarily want to. They want to go and touch and feel the vehicle. They want to get the expertise from the salesperson, and it's a big purchase for most people, and they want to be sure that they're making the right decision, and dealers can help them do that.
Yeah, hi. Just one question. In your experience in the United States, in an EV world, what happens to dealers? Could you just talk a bit about that in the sense? So I'm just combining one more question. Mr. Raja in the presentation talked about almost 70% of the gross profit coming from service revenues. And in electric vehicles, it's over-the-air software updates and all. So just in your experience, how would a dealership survive in that scenario? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, in the United States, clearly electric vehicles are still emerging. Obviously, we have the example of Tesla, which is quite widespread in the United States, but as we all know, they operate a model which does not have a franchise dealer network. If we look to China, where, of course, electric vehicles are far more ubiquitous, the new entrants are going down a number of different routes. So that's probably the more pertinent country to look at. New entrants in particular are looking at whether they should go through a franchise dealer network route or whether they should go through some kind of agency model where the dealer just is paid a flat rate per vehicle. And the reasons, of course, around this are, it is expected that service should be less for electric vehicles. So therefore, the business model needs to be closely examined as we move from ICE, internal combustion engine, through to electric vehicles. And to what degree can the franchise model be sustained exactly in its current form, given the expectations are that the revenue and the profits from the service department could possibly decrease. But I think at the moment, it's fair to say that the jury is out. And as in the United States, as in China, many of the established global brands are introducing electric vehicles alongside the ICE vehicles. And so they haven't necessarily got to the point where this has become a major problem. But that's a good question, and I know all global manufacturers are examining that closely.
Hi. In this current Indian car market slowdown, many media articles have been coming saying multi-brand outlets. So buyers being brand conscious. So as per your experience in US, have you ever seen multi-brand outlets being a success, like a same outlet selling Ford, Kia, General Motors, etc.? How do you see that evolving down the line, if at all?
Well, typically in the United States, many volume brands are multi-brand franchises. So many dealers may have, even on one site, they will have could have up to 2, 3, 4 franchises. However, in terms of corporate identity, they will be clearly delineated. So the challenge, of course, it makes, from a dealer's perspective, it absolutely makes sense because you can sometimes combine the back operations or the fixed ops or various other things and just have a new vehicle sales and used sales as in clearly delineated areas with different corporate identity. And that's a route that many of the dealers go down. OEMs, of course, are very insistent, and rightly so, that they maintain different corporate identity between the different brands. And of course, I know from an OEM perspective, of course, OEMs would prefer that dealers have brands on the same location that don't directly compete with one another, because of course that makes sense, right? You wouldn't necessarily want a dealer to have a BMW and a Mercedes dealer right next to each other. And in fact, most of the premium brands still insist on standalone. But from a volume perspective, dealers as well would try and sort of have some kind of differentiation between the brands that they're actually selling from any given site.